represents the Isodraw Service Information Solutions team. Since 1983, Scott has been involved in interactive technical publication analysis for end users with a focus on graphics data exchange and best practices. His primary interests are how the end user interprets graphical information to perform tasks and how this information complements documentation. He has participated in the Tri-Services IATM Working Group, the S1000D Standards Working Groups as well. Scott retired from the U.S. Navy in 2000 and joined Aikido Software, now PTC, to represent Arbortext IsoDraw. He is based in Redding, California. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me to present today. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to let your illustrations do the talking. So let me see how this works. So I'm Scott Allshouse. So this is the person who's talking to you today, and want to give you some information in a few slides before we actually start doing a live presentation with Isodraw. First off, what's the heritage of Isodraw? Where did it come from? And what does communicating with illustrations going to do for you? How does that help? Finding value in the illustration process, and then we'll jump right into doing an Isodraw presentation. And then talk a little bit about some success stories, companies from different industries out there that have done very well working with a higher level of technical illustration in their documentation. And then some questions there at the end. And of course, as Janice had mentioned earlier, she's able to take your questions as we move through this. You can just go ahead and type those in. So, move on a little bit. Where did Isodraw come from? Actually born from technical illustration as it was done on the board years ago. So it's not about typical creative graphics that you might find on the web, like dancing clowns and flowers or anything like that. And it's not a CAD tool, but fortunate that it is able to use those typical graphics or CAD as sources. So Isodraw born from that type of technical illustration as it was done on the board, and we worked with our first 3D CAD file in 1992. So if your company is designing in 3D CAD today, this is nothing new to us. Now, many of our customers, and I suspect you as well, are building products out there that are intended to be in service for a long time. So your technical illustrations are very valuable resources too, because they're supporting all of that equipment that you're creating. So just as long as the equipment's going to be around, so should the illustrations, in a way that you're going to be able to continue to reuse them. So graphic standards are important to us. And today we continue to lead the computer graphics metafile standards out there. Very important in defense and aerospace, but customers in many other industries are using this now because they realize the value of it, and they don't want to be changing from one proprietary format to another every 5 years. Very costly. And of course, for documentation standards, a lot of folks are becoming interested in S1000D, which is very widespread throughout the aerospace industry. So, who's using Isodraw? Obviously, it's been around since 1990, so I could have a whole bunch of slides that look like this, but just to give you an example of some of the industries and players that are using it. And these aren't just token logos that I've thrown up here. These companies are genuinely using Isodraw for production purposes, for doing parts catalogs, service manuals, repair instructions, even assembly instructions down on the shop floor or out on the customer site. We'll see why they're doing these things here shortly. So what's a technical illustration? First off, let me say that it's not every little engineering detail that they might use for design and manufacturing. It's only an illustration to communicate exactly what it is that that technician, that mechanic, that operator needs to do to perform their task. That's all it is. So if you have far too much detail in there, which they might have in the CAD design, it only adds to the time that they have to think about it and try to figure out what message are you trying to communicate to me. So in a lot of cases, less detail is better for technical illustration. Here's a couple of examples that might help you on this. Over here on the left-hand side, you've got an old 2D CAD drawing. Maybe it came out of AutoCAD or something like that. You know, engineers went to school for a long time to learn how to create and interpret these things. But your average technician out there isn't going to be able to pick up on this. So it's up to the person with the illustration responsibilities to take something like this and turn it into something useful like this. And let me tell you, it's a lot easier than what you think by looking at the example here. So we've put this into a perspective view. We've added some hands tools, some directional arrows on how to put the fasteners in, all useful to help you quickly understand, what am I supposed to do with this? Over here on the right, you look at the rigging for this. I mean, you can see that Isodraw is valuable in all different types of industries. I mean, everything from toys and baby buggies to stealth fighters, or a piece of dental equipment, for instance, is useful. But in this case, we've got this rigging, and someone might say, well, I could just take that rigging straight out of the CAD system and be done with it. Maybe so. But there's a lot of details, perhaps safety related, that are important here. And I need to go back on that. There we go. So here we pull out a magnifier on how to hook up the rigging. Or maybe we need to tighten that rigging up to make sure it's secure. We've added some symbology with the illustration to show that you do need to wear your safety harness, or you're not going to be enjoying your Thanksgiving dinner with the family. You're going to end up in the hospital, obviously. Putting in some directional arrows. Over here, we've added some callouts in. Down here, we've got some fasteners, but we've went and added threads onto those fasteners. A lot of time in the CAD system, the engineers do not put threads on their fasteners. But how does that technician know what he's supposed to be working with? Is he got to work with a pin or with a threaded bolt? So it's up to you to tell them, to help them with those things. All right, why do you want to improve your illustration? You got time to market pressures out there. You've got new products that you're trying to ship, and perhaps you're in an industry that's very competitive. So your company's trying to get out there a month, 6 months, maybe a year ahead of the other guys. Great, you got new products you're ready to ship, but is your documentation and illustrations ready to go? Oftentimes it's not. In some cases I've heard that companies are shipping new products and they're putting on the invoice that the technical documentation is back ordered. And the reason for that is design didn't give the information to tech pubs in time to do all these things. Well, we're starting to find out that there's some regulatory and legal things happening with regard to that. For instance, the FDA is telling some medical equipment manufacturers, unless your documentation accurately reflects the equipment that's being shipped, you can't ship product. Well, that's obviously going to hurt the company if they're trying to beat the other guys out the door. So I'll help you to understand how you can solve these types of problems here in a little bit. You're trying to deliver your products globally, but it costs a king's ransom to try to translate technical documentation, textual information, I should say, into all of those different languages out there. And then you have to hope that the company that's doing the translation for you truly understands how to translate, say, English into a language where your product's actually going. You know, the widget in English, if someone doesn't understand what they're doing properly, could turn into the brown fuzzy critter in another language, and that's obviously not what you want to happen. So thinking about technical illustration, which is worth 1,000 words in any language, if you're able to add more technical illustration into your documentation, you can actually reduce translation costs and usually get the message across the way you want. Aftermarket parts and service strategies, companies are looking for a lot of ways, especially in our economy right now, to bring more business in, especially in the aftermarket. Well, if you've got higher quality illustrations for your parts or your service manuals, oftentimes end customers will just as soon get everything from you directly than trying to go out and search for it from third parties. You think that there's a piece of equipment out there. I could buy a bolt from anybody. But if they can find it faster and find the part number information a lot quicker in what you provide them, chances are you've got an opportunity to pick up more business. Folks look at tech pubs and sometimes think, well, that's just a cost center for the company. But if tech pubs are done properly, it can actually add to revenue and improvements in many other areas of the company, and they're often not measured. They're not tied back to the quality of illustration. These are all things that you should be thinking of. You may have industry standards that you have to comply with, and if you do, that's something that can certainly be helped by doing your illustrations in the right way. Every customer wants it their way. You may have a baseline piece of equipment that you deliver out to the field, but you've got a big customer and they said, we'll buy this from you if you do this and this and this for me. Well, great. Now you have to have multiple configurations of documentation. How are you going to handle that? If you're putting it all into the file system and trying to manage it that way, it's going to become pretty unwieldy after a while. Technical illustration the same way. If you think back to all the different iterations of illustrations that have been created for a piece of equipment in the past, do you know where a specific illustration is today that you could potentially reuse? If it's not being managed right, probably not, and you'll end up recreating it all over again. So that's time potentially wasted on that. And then getting rid of backlogs. Oftentimes people responsible for tech pubs have a huge backlog and a lot of pressure because products are ready to ship. You want to get rid of those things. So here is what exists with a lot of companies out there today. You've got these fantastic folks over here in engineering and design, and they're taking those ideas that people scribble down on napkins and turning them into new prototypes and new products that are going to make all sorts of revenue for the company. But they often don't communicate a lot of information to tech pubs in advance of all the things that they're going to need to do to properly support these new products that are being built out there. So because engineering's not feeding tech pubs with information that they're going to need, tech pubs need to find out about it themselves, and often it's very late in the game. And a story might be a writer goes to the illustrator and says, I need this for my documentation, and then the illustrator goes and walks all the way across the campus to design and engineering and finds his friend in there and says, can you open this up in the CAD system and position it this way and explode it out and then send a file over to me so I can use it for my illustration? And of course, his friend in engineering is totally happy to stop working on the latest and greatest prototype to do all these illustration tasks for him. So that all happens. He goes back to his desk, he sits down, the writer comes over, they're looking over each other's shoulder. They say, well, the drawing looks nice, but if we could have just rotated this another 5 degrees, we could see that bolt that's coming in on the back side. Well, sure, I'm happy. I'll just go back over to engineering and ask them to do that for me. Well, after you do that over and over and over again, engineering puts a nice sign up on their door, and it says illustrators keep out. And very, very true story there that actually happened. So If you're not getting engineering information in time, obviously there's going to be delays in creating the documentation. Design freezes a week before you're supposed to deliver. That's not giving you a lot of time to create your documentation. Revisions after the products have shipped, it's costly in time and money. Your customers out in the field are not going to be very happy if they receive a product and the documentation is wrong and they have a repair that they have to do. So it's going to cost them time because they intended to use it for production, and it's going to cost your company money now because now you're having to do warranty repairs, perhaps send engineers to a customer site far away to do repairs on a piece of equipment that could have been satisfied by a couple of illustrations if they had been known. So just things to think about there. So today we're going to talk about IsoDraw and how it can help bridge this gap between engineering design and technical publications requirement. First off, you've got like an intelligent workspace here. It's going to allow you to reuse legacy graphics that you've created in the past in many different formats. It's going to allow you to draw from scratch in a way that illustrators used to do years ago when they were drawing on the board by hand. But it's nice in this case that it's no extra effort on your part. Now you're able to reuse 3D CAD data inside of a 2D illustration tool. You don't have to go to night school for a couple of months to learn how to become a CAD jockey either. We've got a customer where they've actually got customer service reps that they have trained to become illustrators in only a few days' time, and they're now developing parts catalog illustrations for the company. There's about 6 or 8 of them that are doing that right now, and they're reusing all that great 3D CAD data. And of course, all of this information is intelligent. And the importance of that is within your authoring tool. For instance, directly integrated with Arbortext, you're able to create links to hotspots inside of the illustration or send commands to animation to perform different steps of procedures or create links to callouts for interactive parts catalogs. So you don't have to be the master of many different tools out there to do this stuff. You can do all of it inside of IsoDraw, and of course you're able to have an associative link back to this design data because engineering will make changes, but you don't have to redo this work all over again. You can actually have it updated automatically. So let's see how this might happen under an ideal situation. Engineer goes ahead and creates something fantastic and puts it into the product data management system. And this is transitioned into something that is consumable on IsoDraw. And of course, the person who's responsible for the illustration tasks. I know that a lot of companies today, they may not have a person with the title of illustrator, but if they do, I'm really happy to hear that. But you may have writers, illustrators, there's even people that are analysts that are doing illustration today. So that's why I say whoever's responsible for the illustration task, they're going to create their illustrations using all the resources that they have available to them inside of IsoDraw. And once they're finished, they check that back in. In this case here, we're working with PTC's Windchill application, and if you'll notice, there's an associative link created from the finished illustration back to that 3D CAD data. Very useful there because when design makes a change, all those 10 or 15 different illustrations you created from that assembly can now be updated automatically if you want them to, or you can use that update information to create a new revision of the graphic. Good. We've got those nice illustrations, and tech writers are sitting over there. They just can't wait to put them into their Arbortext documents. So they're consuming them and creating fantastic documentation and they check them back into the wind chill. Here again, you've got another associative link created, really valuable, and subsequently you're going to publish your information out, whether it be in some electronic format that's totally interactive, or maybe a PDF that people might want to print. But notice again, it is associative. So should design sneeze and decide we're going to change that from 8 bolts to 6 bolts on that flange assembly, in the past they never told you. So your documentation showed 8 bolts when it was really 6. Today, though, when the design changes, the writer and the illustrator are alerted to it right away. They can decide how they want to handle it, either as a new revision or overwrite the original documentation. All the illustrations are immediately updated. The documentation can all be immediately updated. And all the resources that the end users out in the field have access to is updated as well. Pretty fantastic idea. It's actually working today. Customers are using this right now. With that, let's go in and take...
Sorry, I have a question from the
audience.
You
do, yeah.
So just to clarify, so there, in the associativity that you were talking about,
yes.
Is there any manual intervention required, or does it automatically update all the associated documents?
No. You are going to have to manually open the illustrations in IsoDraw. I mean, a lot of illustrators and writers don't like total surprises, like going off on vacation and coming back and seeing that everything that they did before they went on vacation magically changed. So you do physically have to open the illustrations inside of IsoDraw that you created, and it's at that point that you'll receive a notification. Do you wish to accept these changes? And if you do, then you accept it and it'll be updated. And I'll show you an example of that here in a little bit in the live demo of IsoDraw.
That answered the question.
Great. All right, so here's the Isodraw Workspace. Notice it's pretty clean in what we're working with on here, so it's not cluttered like what you might find in a typical graphics application. Pretty easy to use, and since we've got a short amount of time here, I better get moving on this. So some of the folks I understand looking in today have an interest in high-tech or medical equipment. So let's take an example over here of it looks like an electron gun for like a laser type of assembly. I'm just going to drag this in. Now this is a 3D CAD file. In this case, it comes from our product view, but it could actually originate from any of the major CAD systems that are out there. And oftentimes, engineering models things at a 1-to-1 size. So I have to scale down quite a bit on this thing to take a look at. So I have a 3D session running inside of a 2D Testicle illustration. And a lot of the illustrations you might be creating out there are going to be in an isometric view, but you have a lot of different perspectives that are available to you up here. Pretty simple to work with. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to go to night school for a couple of months to learn how to use IsoDraw. It's pretty simple. So we'll just go ahead and pull these up, and then we'll just grab the washers on here. And we'll start exploding this out in a way that makes sense. Good. So we got those out of the way. And then we'll come down here. We'll grab a few parts on this and pull them out as well. Over here we look at this. It looks like a series of electronic components inside of here. How do I grab all these things? Well, some of the information that existed in the CAD data continues to persist inside of IsoDraw. And this is useful for me because I can actually bring up the structure of that CAD file inside of IsoDraw and say, well, I want to just capture that at the top level assembly. So now I've got all of these parts, and this seem to be part of the same assembly. So we'll just go ahead and drag them all out like this. Pretty easy to do. You can also use this window right here to search for parts. So if someone says, I want you to pay special attention to the widget, well, great. What does the widget look like? You don't know. So you can come over and actually search for it in this window, and it will highlight it inside of the illustration. Okay, so let's come over here. Not everything's going to always explode, say, on the X, Y, or the Z axis. So sometimes we need to be able to pull some parts out in a different way. So it's pretty easy. We can just tell IsoDraw to look for those things. Good. So we've created this. Let's zoom out and see. These are all the parts that we've just exploded off of here. And we're going to project this out to some finished line art. Okay, so there's one. Now, recently I met with someone who was getting screenshots like this from engineering. That's all they were getting, was maybe as a JPEG file or something like that. And they were having to open it up in their graphics application and trace this stuff for everything that they needed. And they would always have to go back to engineering and say, can you rotate it? Can you do this for me? They get another screenshot, and they'd have to rotate or retrace that thing all over again. Now, things might be a little bit different in your company. Maybe you're trying to create it in the CAD system yourself. Maybe you have a CAD workstation on your desktop. For technical illustration purposes, sometimes that's like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. You know, the CAD systems are very heavy. They're fantastic for doing design, but never really intended for doing illustration. And of course, afterwards, you've got a lot of cleanup and additional details you need to do, and so you have to use another tool to do that with. So in this case here, I just want to do a rotation on this. And of course, I could rotate the whole thing if I wanted to freely, you know, on any axis. Or maybe I have a style guide I want to follow, so I can say I must show a view that's 180 out. So there we go. So we've already created one 2D illustration. I'm going to create a second one here, and I'll show you both in just a moment. Good. So notice I can keep coming back to my 3D session and creating as many illustrations as I want from this. I can create animations, and I can also output 3D to a 3D PDF file if I wish to. But for now, we're going to come over here and take a look. Here's my first illustration, and notice it's still pretty huge. But that's easy to fix in IsoDraw. We just want to make sure that it fits onto that page that we have. I'll put a 20mm border around it, and there we go. So everything's sitting on that page right now. That's one view, and I can grab it and move it around, whatever I need to do. Let's move over to the other illustration, which was 180 out. Again, pretty big. We'll just go ahead and tell it to fit onto the page. And you can make your page sizes any way you want, or you could fit it into a small box. That's up to your choosing. Some of these things can actually be done as a macro if you wish. Good. So we've got this nice drawing, and if you go in and take a look at it, you've got all these great details that normally are not going to show up coming from the CAD system and trying to do cleanup work in a typical graphics application. You know, if you look at the quality of the spring, you can even see inside of these screws that these aren't, you know, Phillips head screws. So you're not going to have a lot of the distortion. Also, things that are important in IsoDraw, is, this is an ellipse right here. Now, if it were coming out of the CAD system and you were doing cleanup on another tool, this ellipse might be anywhere from 10 to 30 line segments, and each one has 2 control points on it. Those can add up to a significant file size. IsoDraw actually sees this as one element, an ellipse. So for every ellipse, and you can see that there's a lot of them in this drawing, it's going to reduce your file sizes dramatically. So IsoDraw always attempts to find the highest level or most elegant level of geometry that allows the illustrator to be able to do the things that they need to do a lot easier afterwards. So good, we've got this. Let's add some callouts on here. Now there's many ways of adding callouts with IsoDraw, but if you had to do it manually, this is how you do it. In some cases, you can actually automate the addition of callouts with IsoDraw from a list or a table that you might have. If you notice, as I'm dragging out these callouts here, that they're automatically numbering themselves. Let's say that number 2 is going to be considered part of a kit. It belongs to number 3 over here. So your boss says, fantastic illustration, I love it, but you're going to have to get rid of number 2 and renumber all your callouts. Well, great, you got a drawing with 45 callouts on it. And of course, this is going to happen, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. At the end of the day, the family's sitting out in the parking lot in the minivan waiting to head off to Grandma's house. All right. So in IsoDraw, all you have to do is just hit the delete key, and it says, do you want to renumber your callouts? Well, you betcha I do. And now they're all renumbered for you. Now, think about how you might do that in your existing processes today. In most cases, you're going to have to go through and do this by hand for every one. And in a lot of cases, you're even going to have to position them to make sure they look centered. IsoDraw takes care of all those things for you. Okay. So we've created a really nice illustration, actually a couple of them very quickly, working with that electron gun. Now, let's say at your company you've got a lot of illustration work that you have to do, a lot of pressure to get equipment out the door, and design is always making changes on you. So here's another example of an illustration that I created earlier. But in this case, what I've done is I've created an associative link back to that source CAD data. So I know that design's going to make a change, and this illustration and another 10 or 20 illustrations that were created from that design are all going to have to be updated. I have IsoDraw set on full auto here, so let's come over and take a look. This is the engineering data that's placed in here right now. We'll just click this up, and you can see that it's set to full automatic. Well, I want IsoDraw to notify me if the design is changed, so we'll just set it that way. And, engineering doesn't always design everything or model everything that might be needed in an illustration. So there are going to be times where you might have to do something for yourself. So just come over here and we'll draw this real quick. Put a little keyway on there. That a gear, and we'll change the number of teeth on it and maybe change the depth to 5 and the angle to -20 degrees. And there we go. And of course, as I was drawing that, I was applying the thick thin line style automatically with IsoDraw. So pretty valuable how it does that. Hang on here a second. There we go. So I'll just go ahead and group this, and I'll scale it as It might be appropriate for the rest of my drawing, and I bring it up here, and we'll just go over and grab the callout tool real quick and pull a new callout, and it takes on the next sequential number inside of that drawing. And by the way, all the callouts in this illustration are already hotspots. IsoDraw applies that automatically as you create callouts. So if you do have an interactive requirement, you can change those things. Okay, so while we're creating all these fantastic illustrations, our good friends in design are over there making changes. And you don't have to even go and talk to the people in design anymore. You know, you can just go ahead and check it out yourself. So we come in here, we take a look at this. There is the whole thing. And yes, that's what I want. So if we come up here, I just want to hide that because that's not going to be important for me. And we'll pick this up. Okay. So in the illustration that we were looking at, this is a brake assembly, and you've got these disc packs in here. So they've got multiple disc packs to help the machine stop. But they've decided that they can reduce the number of disc packs that are in there and still get the same benefit. You know, obviously, a company's looking for some places where they can cut some corners, but not impact the operation of the machine. So all we have to do is just come over here, and we're going to change that number down to 4. We just say OK to that, and then we'll regenerate it, and we'll save the file. Now, I want you to notice you may not be able to see it inside of here, you know, the disc pack change, but out here, the spring pack, all the springs are now extended on here. So inside the CAD system, it's smart. It understands those types of things. This is also going to reflect in the IsoDraw illustration. So we'll just go ahead and save this out. And we go back to IsoDraw. Okay, so IsoDraw is now telling me that it's changed. Now, IsoDraw was already open. I could have come back after the holidays and opened up IsoDraw and went to this illustration and received the same message. So yes, I do want to update it. So you have to think what I did with the CAD data. Originally, it was really huge. It was done at a 1-to-1. I went and rotated things around. I exploded parts out. Maybe I duplicated some parts, and then afterwards, I projected it out to the line art that I needed. I could also project it out with color in it if I chose to. Thick, thin line style was applied to it. There was intelligence in the graphic for doing hotspots. I drew some things myself in the graphic, created callouts, all those types of things. So those are called graphical attributes. Well, IsoDraw is applying those graphical attributes again to the change in the CAD data. It's read through the CAD data, and it sees that the disc packs have changed. It needs to go and update it. So if we go in here and we look, I have fewer discs in here now. I have the extended spring pack on here. But all the things that I added myself, such as the callouts, they're all still there. The scaling that I did, the rotation, the thick, thin line style, all those graphical attributes have been rerun in the drawing. This is so hugely important because if you think today of what might be required, if design did make a change and you found out about it, you're going to have to go back to the CAD system, in a lot of cases, recreate the explosion, output it in 2D, do the cleanup all over again, add in details that engineering didn't provide, and then put it into your documentation, only to find out design makes another change. So IsoDraw is going to allow you to create that link to the source. You can link to 3D CAD data, but you can also link to 2D as well. IsoDraw does not care what you create a link to, so you might have some things that you like to reuse over and over again, just as you would like a warning or a caution or a note inside of an XML document in IsoDraw, you can certainly work with these things this way. So let me move over to an example of what am I going to do with all these fantastic things. Well, got some examples that have been done with the Arbortext editor in combination with IsoDraw. And if you have the most current version of the Arbortext editor, this is an example that's found in the samples folder. So you can actually go in there and bring it up in your Arbortext and see what happens. So in this case here, you've got an intelligent graphic that exists in your document. And you notice as I'm mousing over top of it with my cursor that as I get near a hot spot, it changes from an arrowhead to a pointing finger. It says, I'm hot. But down here in the Arbortext document, the author has actually created textual links to those hotspots. And there's some dialogues in Arbortext today that allow you to do that. So there I'm just highlighting that little part. Now, I'm doing this in a very simplistic way. In this case here, it moves the drawing and centers this up, but it does keep it highlighted. And over here, we've went and we've zoomed directly in on it. Maybe it's a really small part that we want to draw attention to. Up here, we want to change the drawing to show the distributor in this case. We want to show it and highlight it. And then, of course, down here, we want to clear all that highlighting that you might find. Here we've got an animation that's been created inside of IsoDraw. So you might go ahead and say, well, I just want to pull that one fastener off of there. Or we might want to pull all those fasteners off of there. You can certainly do that. Maybe the end user wants to look at this in a different way. Well, if you're distributing this out to the field interactively with using the Arbortext and IsoView, your customers are able to manipulate the 3D and look at it in different ways. And, of course, they can still continue to play their animations if they want to. Down here, different type of example where you might go in and navigate around on a drawing that way. And over here, you're able to navigate from hotspots to different things. So, for instance, if I click on this, it takes me to another location. If I click on this hotspot, it takes me out to the PTC website. Okay, great. See if I can find my way back to where I was. Okay. Come over here. So it's taking me around in different places. So a hotspot inside of a graphic is very powerful, and it will allow you to navigate graphically from one graphic to another, and not just graphic to graphic, but actually to a graphic object inside of another illustration. You could click on a hotspot and allow it to take you to some specific text in a document. Maybe you want to right-click on a schematic or something like that and have it bring up a drop-down menu that gives you a circuit description or a link to where this indicator is actually located on the control panel. All types of possibilities that you have here. So these are some of the types of things that our customers are doing out there. Another example maybe for a parts catalog. Of course, many different languages. I'm going to pick the language that I have the fewest problems with, and we bring this up. And this is just one way of doing these types of things. So we launched this, and up here we've got, you can see screen tips that are coming up. I clicked on one part, but it found that there were two instances of it inside of the drawing. And the parts table down below has moved up and actually highlighted what those parts are. Maybe I'm interested in what number 7 is, and it found that there were 2 of those inside of the drawing. So all these types of things are important, and then of course you can come in and zoom in on these things, and you can see that there's very high quality in here. Obviously there's a lot of small parts with fine detail on it. All of these things created in IsoDraw being displayed in a web-based interactive environment. Good. So real high-level, fast overview of some of the capabilities of IsoDraw, IsoView, working in context with the PTC solutions to help you understand how you can create technical illustrations and get them out in front of the end users. Whether this is a customer that's very, very far away and you want to help them comprehend their task a lot easier so they don't have to be calling customer service with so many questions, or maybe your company's trying to reduce the amount of discards on the shop floor during the assembly process. An example of this, recently a customer that adopted IsoDraw, assembly instructions were going down onto the shop floor in advance of creating these big circuit breakers. And what was happening is the assembly instructions would often be wrong. So the assembly line would run for several days with the wrong instructions. They would realize it because design had made a change, and all these circuit breakers had been glued together. Well, guess what? They had to throw them all away. They couldn't just take them apart again and fix them. They had to throw them all away and start over again. So that's a huge cost to the company, not to mention the amount of labor effort that went into creating those, and now they have to do it all over again. And they have deadlines that have to be met as well. So let's go back here, take a look at these slides to finish up, and then we may be able to have some time for some more questions. IsoDraw and the intelligent merge space there obviously intended to help you work with 3D, 2D illustration, animation. You can draw from scratch just as easily. I do know that some of you have photo tracing requirements. You know, if engineering doesn't model it and maybe you have to go out on the shop floor and take a photo of it, you can do those things. You have raster editing. Maybe there was a piece of equipment that was created years ago and it was drawn by hand. Well, certainly you can scan that in and bring that into IsoDraw. And creating hotspots is so easy. I mean, even if you have legacy graphics with some callouts on it, in a lot of cases, creation of callouts on there can be automated. Lots of customers have done that. And you can publish it out in industry standards many different ways. So what I'm telling you here is to leverage your 2D and your 3D CAD data. If your company is designing with those tools, especially with the 3D, you're able to save a huge amount of time and effort in creating your illustrations. And your customers are going to notice. You're going to be able to create a lot more than what you were ever able to do previously. The hidden line removal, that's what HLR stands for, is done as an illustrator would do it, not as the CAD system does it. You know, CAD systems really don't care about technical illustration, but IsoDraw does, and it knows how to do it in the right way so that you and I can understand the illustrations a lot faster and do the jobs without error. You know, we've talked a little bit about 3D animation, and some companies are thinking, well, wow, you know, 3D animation is cool. Maybe I'll just do everything as a 3D animation. Let me throw up some lessons learned from our customers out there. First off, 2D is not going anywhere for a long time, at least for the next 20 years. Some customers realize, though, that it can help to complement 2D with 3D. So why do you still need to have 2D? It's the only way that you can fully control that message to that technician, that customer, to look at me this way, do it this way. If this were nothing but 3D and that's all the customer had, First off, they're going to have to wait for the 3D to completely play out before they can do anything. And oftentimes, they're going to have to replay it over and over and over again to make sure that they get it right. Now, if you thought 3D was cool, so do they. So they're going to play with it just as much as you do. And the problem is when they start playing with it and they have nothing to reference it from, they may lose the intent that you wanted them to have. So now the 3D could be a source of error. So just exercise caution whenever you're thinking about those types of things. Improving your time to market. You know design's going to make changes. Instead of having to wait until week 11, and there's only 1 week left until the product ships, you could potentially start your illustration during week 2 of the design process for a big order that's coming up. And as the design changes, just update the illustrations downstream. Okay? Very little work effort on your part to do those things. And when it comes time to publish out to the field, your documentation, your illustrations are actually going to represent what was manufactured and put on the truck to be sent out to the customers. We looked briefly at our integration between Arbortext, Windchill, and IsoDraw. Pretty fantastic there in handling the associativity all the way from design through technical illustration out to authoring and publishing. And of course, being able to manage the revision history, not just of your illustrations now, but also for what's being published. Helps prevent a lot of that duplicative effort that's happened in the past where documents or illustrations have been created for one product and then totally forgotten, or I can't remember where it is, so you can't reuse the content for some emergency shipment that needs to go out tomorrow. So who's benefiting from Isodraw? Well, here's a customer. They make medical rehabilitation equipment, and they wanted to, one, improve the quality of their illustration, but they also had a challenge in that many different languages had to be supported in their documentation, because they're a global company. And it was costing them quite a bit in translation costs. So they decided, well, we'll create more technical illustrations. There was another thing in here as well, in that some of the people that were assembling or end customers that were actually using their equipment were, they weren't doing things properly. There was errors in how they were doing it. And you can imagine an error in the use of a piece of medical equipment could lead to some ambulance chasers wanting to take these types of things into the court system, and obviously that costs a lot of money. So a very inexpensive improvement in technical illustration can certainly save a company a lot of legal expenses. So a lot of companies around the world do use our technology to help keep them out of hot water. So things to think about. Veland, another company, not necessarily in medical equipment, but this company makes connection devices for high-tech and laser optics, those types of things. And so they've been able to benefit from Isodraw. As I mentioned earlier, it really doesn't matter. Everything from baby buggies, toys, stealth fighters, all illustrated within Isodraw. And this is pretty fantastic here when you take a look at it. And this is one of those little new Undersink heaters. People are starting to move away from using big hot water tanks now, and they're actually putting little heaters in their bathrooms and their kitchens directly under the sink so you can have instant hot water. So obviously pretty important for a company like Kohler. AM General, I think we all know this company more for, they build the Humvees that our troops are using out there. They were actually one of the first adopters of the Isodraw CAD process, being able to reuse that 3D CAD data. And initially, they found a 50% improvement over their existing processes. Now, I know this is a lot bigger than a piece of maybe medical diagnostics equipment, but I can tell you that it is a very high-tech machine. Earlier this week, I was meeting with a company where a schoolgirl might come home from school and climb into a tractor and set a program in the tractor and actually go out and harvest the crops without touching another button, and she can be doing her homework in the tractor while it runs through the fields. I mean, her only reason for being there is just to make sure if something does go wrong that she can resolve it. So pretty high tech, a lot of computers, electronics, sensors, those types of things in these types of machines. Now, if you look up here at the top, they said a time savings of 90%. I will assure you that Liebherr was not using a hammer and a chisel on a cave wall to create their illustrations before they started using Isodraw. You know, they weren't totally elegant in their process. They were actually trying to create them in the CAD system and then do cleanup effort using typical graphics tools afterwards. And today, because they're using Isodraw, this is the type of savings, and they're able to create more illustrations than they could previously, and this is helping to cut away on translation costs, cuts down on customer service calls, it reduces sending field engineers out to customer sites, and their customer satisfaction has improved dramatically, and obviously that's good for Liebherr's business. So with all that, I thank you all very much for your attention today. I hope I've provided some valuable information with regard to testicle illustration that's going to be able to benefit your company. Janice, Liz,
Yes,
do
Scott?
we have some more questions?
Yes, I've been holding some in queue. Thank you very much. This has been very informative. First question, and I know you've covered this, but I'm just going to ask it anyways because it was put out there, is which CAD systems do you support with Isodraw?
Well, obviously PTC owns Isodraw, so we've got the direct integration with Pro Engineer and our product view formats. And through adapters, we're able to handle a lot of the other formats. One example might be JT, which you would find, say, with Unigraphics or coming out of Team Center. There are neutral formats that Isodraw has internally to it, so you can actually get information out of any of the major CAD systems, say as step files or IGES files. Into Isodraw. And I know if you go and you mention an IGES file to an engineer, you know, they might roll their eyes a little bit and say, I guess. And that's because they remember IGES and trying to do data exchange from CAD system to CAD system. But Isodraw really doesn't care about that type of data exchange. It's only interested in the graphical information. So when Isodraw CAD process started out years ago, IGES was the dominant format that we were reading in before we were starting to be able to handle native formats. IGES is totally fantastic, and even though you do have to output IGES from the CAD system, the time that you will save in creating your illustrations could be anywhere from 50 to over 80% of the time that it used to take you previously. So don't discount using some of those neutral exchange formats out there that all the CAD systems can support today. So I'm saying that you can bring data in from CATIA, from SolidWorks, from Inventor, from Unigraphics. I don't care where it comes from. You can bring them all in. Even our own co-create now, you can do that.
Thank you. Another question I have from the audience is, Can you talk about layering text to support multiple languages?
Yes, and if you bear with me for a moment, I think I might be able to show you a real quick example of that. Okay, one moment here. Okay, so here's an example. In Isodraw, you have text that's been placed on different layers, and they are being activated by viewports in this case. So there's German, there's English, French, Spanish, Japanese. So Isodraw is going to support any of the languages that are permitted in Unicode. So that's pretty much global out there, just as well as Arbortext. So you can also turn these layers on and off in Isodraw. So if you have a requirement to just ship a German document off to someone, you can tell all the other layers that you will not publish whenever I send this over to the writer to go into the document. So people have actually been using this going back into the early 90s.
Okay. Sorry, I have another question. We have so little time that I need to kind of fire off a couple more questions to you.
Sure.
Can you import Illustrator files into Isodraw? And if you make changes to those same files, will it auto-update or allow you to relink to the new Illustrator files?
Okay, let's go back to Isodraw here real quick. And we'll go and take a look at Isodraw does allow you to open Adobe Illustrator files. I don't have any in that folder there right now. Let me come over here real quick and let's see if we can find some information on the Adobe Illustrator here. So Isodraw is pretty intense about how it handles data exchange. It's not just about formats. We look at it a lot deeper in what we refer to as doing data exchange. So I'm trying to find the Adobe Illustrator format somewhere in all of these files here.
Okay, and while you're looking for that, I'll ask you another question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So on the associativity and the updating the Isodraw illustrations, the question is the reverse. When you change an illustration, do you change the CAD drawing?
No. And that is definitely not permissible in most companies. The last thing engineering wants is for the illustrators or writers to have a mechanism to monkey around with their design. So no, it is not possible to feed back into the design data to make changes to that. Now, through the PDM link, you are able to communicate different things. It's sort of nice, you know, at some companies they see Isodraw as being a bit of a tattletale in the design. For instance, engineering didn't model it, so you had to draw it in. So as a subject matter expert, as a writer, illustrator, you notice these things. So now you have a mechanism to send something back to design. And since you've already created the illustration, you can link that illustration to your annotations or comments that you're making back to design saying, hey, you should take a look at this. I just created this illustration, and it seems like something's missing. And design might pick up on that and say, oh, you're right. You know, I'll take care of that. So it really does help the collaboration inside of the company, and certainly something to make you even more competitive in the marketplace. So here on the Adobe Illustrator question, today Isodraw is able to directly interpret the Adobe Illustrator 7, 88, and 6 formats. It was after the Adobe Illustrator 7 format that the Illustrator format became more like a PDF file, okay? And of course, PDF has a lot of different types of variations with regards to graphics. So if you are using AI today, and you wanted to bring those into IsoDraw, you would need to save them down to an AI7. Now, it's not listed on here, but there are some graphics done in AI8 that can be directly read in IsoDraw. IsoDraw will also read in vector-based EPS files. So if it's all vector, IsoDraw can read that in. But do know that EPS is intended as a publishing format and not necessarily as a data exchange format. That a lot of customers out there using that originally used Adobe Illustrator, and today they're using IsoDraw. You may also consider SVG as an option, but do be careful because Adobe Illustrator and CorelDRAW both have proprietary implementations on the SVG standard. We do it in a full compliance to the SVG standard.
For a couple more questions, and here's one for you. Can I combine an IsoDraw illustration with data in another file, say a parts list, that is maintained in Excel?
Sure. Sure. You can go ahead and bring other information from parts lists, say as a output it from Excel as a tab delimited text file. A lot of cases, customers will use those parts table information in an Excel spreadsheet to actually automatically generate the callouts within the drawing. If you take a look over here at this object list, here's the finished illustration that we're looking at here. And that structure that existed earlier when I was working with the 3D CAD data, it persists in the finished illustration. But what you see here is only what is visible in the finished illustration. So for instance, if I had 20 parts that were on the back side of this right here, I can't see them now, so they don't show here. Now in the 3D session, they would all be totally visible. And by the way, what we're looking at here, since it's associative back to the 3D CAD data, if I need to change the position on some of these parts because of the automatic update, all I have to do is just right-click on it, and I can reactivate the 3D session, move it around, and put it right back the way it was. Does that help to answer your question, I hope?
Yes, it does. And the next question has to do with file size and storage. The question is the IsoDraw, I'll try to truncate it, is the IsoDraw drawing the same size as the original CAD file, or is it smaller?
It's much smaller. It's going to be a lot smaller. Now, if you look at this example right here, you've got a lot of springs. You've got all these gear teeth in here. So obviously, this is going to be a larger file. But let me go ahead and let's see what we can do inside of this. Hang on. I may already have this out here. Okay, so there's the break file. We'll pull up the properties on this. So this is 533K, and it is associative. It's got a huge amount of details in there. Now, if we go to the folder where the original CAD data existed that I pulled all of that from, come over into this. 18 megabytes. So we went from 18 megabytes of information down to 545K. That's pretty significant, and you can even get a lot smaller inside of IsoDraw.
Okay, great. And the questions keep rolling in, but I have one more question. And then after
Yeah.
that, we're going to have to, because we've already gone a little bit over. This has been a fascinating presentation. One of the questions that I have from the audience is, everything that you showed was in the same perspective and view. Can I resize parts and pull them out at a different perspective?
Absolutely. You can, when you're working with the assembly, you can go ahead and do many different things with that. Let's see here. We'll just do a real quick one to show you an example of that. Okay, so here I'll just take an IGES file into the drawing, and we'll position it this way, and we'll automatically explode this out since everything is on the same axes. And there we go. So let's duplicate this part, and we'll pull this part over here, and I'll just scale it because I'm going to make a magnifier on this one. And maybe we want to position it around to look at it in a different way. And then we'll just project that out to some line art real quick. So there's the new one that I just created. Okay, so you can start working with that, but I can go right back to this, and I continue moving things around if I want to. Maybe I have another drawing that I want to do now. Well, that's fine. You know, I can just come up here, and we'll just position this another way, and we'll just shoot another picture of it. And here we go. Now, of course, I'm doing everything in black and white line art here, but I can also go ahead and shoot these things out in other ways if I need to. If I wanted to create, say, a 3D PDF file or a Vermal file, any of these types of formats here I can support in a 3D session, or obviously in a 2D session I can work with color too. And overlay the color information with interactive line art if I choose to do that as well. And this is a high-tech sensor right here that I just went and pulled out from a company called Liebold.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, we're a little over time, and I want to thank you all for attending today's web session on Let Your Illustrations Do the Talking, and thank you so much, Scott Allshouse, for taking the time to walk us through this fantastic program.
It was a privilege, and again, happy to help everyone out. Thanks so much, and enjoy your weekend and the upcoming holidays.
Thanks, you, Scott.
Bye-bye.